I've been sitting on this one for years, and I guess this is as good a place as any to finally say it out loud. Or type it out, whatever. You know those posts where people confess something they did and try to justify it halfway through? Yeah. This might be one of those. So here it is. I once staged a theft that never actually happened, and somehow, that made it worse than if I'd just stolen something outright. Back then, I was working a pretty unremarkable job, inventory assistant at a mid-sized electronics warehouse. Nothing glamorous. Long hours, repetitive tasks, and just enough responsibility that if something went missing, people noticed. I wasn't struggling financially, not exactly, but I wasn't doing great either. Rent was creeping up, my debts weren't shrinking, and I had this constant, low-level panic about falling behind. But money wasn't the only reason. What really pushed me over the edge was this weird mix of boredom and resentment. I knew the system inside out, how stock was logged, how audits were done, who double-checked what, spoiler, almost no one. I kept thinking, this place runs on trust more than security. And then one day, during a routine audit, my supervisor joked, if someone wanted to steal from here, they wouldn't take anything. They'd just make it look like something was gone. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Because the second he said it, something clicked in my head. Not like a sudden evil plan, more like a quiet realization. A loophole. Staging a theft is a crime without a criminal. That sentence stuck with me for days. At first, it was just a thought experiment. Then it became a curiosity. And eventually, it became a plan. I told myself I wasn't really stealing. I wasn't taking anything home. No one would lose anything permanently. It would just create a situation. A disruption. Maybe even expose flaws in the system. That's what I told myself, anyway. Looking back, that's when I crossed the line, long before I actually did anything. Because once you start justifying something like that, it's not really a question of if you'll do it. It's when. Once the idea took hold, I couldn't really shake it. It followed me around during shifts, popped up while I was half asleep, even crept into conversations when I was pretending to listen to people. The more I thought about it, the more it felt less like a bad idea and more like a puzzle I wanted to solve. I started small, just observing. Noticing patterns I'd ignored before. Who actually checked the logs versus who just signed off on them. Which cameras worked, and which ones were basically decorative. There were blind spots, not huge ones, but enough. Enough for someone patient. And I was patient. I began writing things down, but never in one place. Notes in my phone, random numbers on receipts, little mental checklists. If anyone had seen the full picture, it would have looked suspicious, but broken apart? Nothing. My goal wasn't to take anything. That was the rule I clung to, like it made everything cleaner. Instead, I wanted to create a discrepancy, something valuable, missing, on paper, but physically still there. No thief. No stolen goods. Just confusion. And somehow, that made it feel safe. That was the lie I kept repeating. Once I committed to the idea, the planning became almost methodical. Like I was running a quiet experiment instead of setting up something that could cost people their jobs. I told myself that distinction mattered. It doesn't, but at the time, it helped me sleep. The key was subtlety. If something big vanished, alarms would go off immediately. But if inventory numbers slowly stopped lining up, that created doubt. People hesitate when they're unsure. I chose a batch of mid-range tablets, not cheap enough to ignore, not expensive enough to trigger instant panic. Perfect middle ground. They moved just slowly enough that a discrepancy wouldn't be obvious right away. Then I started rehearsing the process in my head. Logging items in, shifting them between storage zones on paper, delaying updates just enough to blur the timeline. Nothing dramatic, just small inconsistencies stacked on top of each other. The strange part? I wasn't nervous yet. If anything, I felt sharp. Focused. Like I finally had control over something in my life. That should have been a warning sign. The first real step didn't feel like a step at all. That's how I justified it. I wasn't doing the crime. Yet, I was just setting conditions, adjusting variables. I started by delaying a routine inventory update. Normally, items scanned at the end of a shift would be logged immediately. That night I forgot. No one questioned it. It happens more often than people think. The next day, I logged part of that batch into a different storage zone, one that was technically valid but rarely checked. On paper, everything still existed. Just slightly misplaced. I remember staring at the screen before hitting confirm. That was the moment I could have stopped. Nothing irreversible had happened yet. It would have been easy to correct, blame it on a typo. But I didn't. Because nothing looked wrong. The system accepted it. No alerts, no flags. Just another entry in a long list of entries no one really scrutinized. That's when it hit me, the system didn't protect itself. It trusted people like me. And I was starting to take advantage of that trust, one quiet adjustment at a time. By the third day, it wasn't an idea anymore, it was happening. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone would notice walking through the warehouse, but inside the system, things were starting to drift. I layered the discrepancies carefully. A few units logged into the wrong shelf here, a delayed scan there, one entry duplicated and another quietly removed. Nothing that screamed theft. Just enough to make the numbers stop lining up perfectly. What surprised me most was how easy it was to act normal. I joked with coworkers, took lunch breaks, complained about the same boring routines. No one looked at me twice. Why would they? In my head, though, everything felt louder. Every beep of a scanner, every mention of inventory, it all sounded like an accusation, even when it wasn't. I kept telling myself, "You're not stealing anything. It's all still here." And technically, that was true. But something else was becoming clear too. This wasn't just about the system anymore. It was about seeing how far I could push it, before it pushed back. It didn't blow up all at once. There was no dramatic alarm or manager storming in. It started with a question, casual, almost forgettable. "Hey, have you seen the tablet batch from last week?" That was it. One of the floor supervisors asked it while flipping through a clipboard, not even looking directly at me. But I felt it anyway. Like a spotlight snapping on. I kept my tone neutral. "Which zone?" He shrugged, already unsure. That was the whole point of what I'd done. Create just enough confusion that no one could immediately pin anything down. I even walked with him to check a couple of shelves, playing along, scanning a few boxes for show. Nothing unusual. Just a mismatch. He frowned, made a note, and moved on. But I didn't. Because that was the moment the plan became real in a different way. It wasn't just data anymore. People were starting to notice something was off. Not what, not why, just off. And that uncertainty? That's where things start to spiral. After that first question, it didn't take long for the uncertainty to ripple outward. Not panic, nothing that obvious, but a kind of quiet tension. People double-checking things they normally wouldn't. Conversations that stopped when someone else walked in. I stayed right in the middle of it. That was part of the plan, or at least something I convinced myself was smart. If I looked involved, helpful, maybe even slightly annoyed by the discrepancies, no one would think to question me. So I leaned into it, offering to rescan shelves, volunteering to compare logs, even pointing out minor inconsistencies like I was helping solve the problem. Which, in a twisted way, I was. The more I helped, the more the issue seemed to scatter. One person thought it was a logging delay. Another blamed a shipment error. Someone else mentioned the possibility of theft, but it sounded uncertain, almost reluctant. That word, theft, hung in the air. And I remember thinking, how do you catch a thief when nothing's actually gone? That thought should have felt clever. Instead, it started to feel dangerous. By the end of the week, the numbers were officially off. Not by a huge margin, but enough that it couldn't be brushed off as a simple mistake anymore. That's when management got involved, not aggressively, just present. Meetings started happening. Short ones at first. Let's review procedures, let's tighten logging. The usual corporate language that sounds calm but carries pressure underneath. I sat in one of those meetings, nodding along, pretending to take mental notes, while my actual thoughts were racing. Because here's the thing I hadn't fully considered: when there's no clear cause, people don't relax, they get more suspicious. One manager suggested a full recount of that section. Another mentioned reviewing access logs. Someone else brought up camera checks. That last one stuck with me. I knew the blind spots. I had built everything around them. But hearing it said out loud made it feel less like an advantage and more like a ticking clock. Still, I told myself I was fine. Nothing had been taken. Everything physically existed. But the situation I'd created? That was very real. The recount happened 2 days later. Not a full warehouse shutdown, but close enough. People were reassigned, sections blocked off, everything scanned again like we were resetting reality. I was part of the team doing it. That was the strangest part, standing there, scanning items I knew were missing, on paper. Every beat felt loaded. Every confirmed entry felt like I was both fixing and exposing my own mess at the same time. At first, things didn't line up, just like I'd designed. But the more thorough the process became, the more the illusions started to crack. Items I had misplaced digitally were being physically accounted for. Which meant one thing: the problem wasn't loss. It was records. I overheard someone say, "This looks internal." That word hit harder than theft. Because internal means limited suspects. It means access logs, shift schedules, patterns. It means people like me. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to real fear, not abstract, not theoretical. Focused. Directed. And getting closer. The recount happened 2 days later. Not a full warehouse shutdown, but close enough. People were reassigned, sections blocked off, everything scanned again like we were resetting reality. I was part of the team doing it. That was the strangest part, standing there, scanning items I knew were missing, on paper. Every beat felt loaded. Every confirmed entry felt like I was both fixing and exposing my own mess at the same time. At first, things didn't line up, just like I'd designed. But the more thorough the process became, the more the illusions started to crack. Items I had misplaced digitally were being physically accounted for. Which meant one thing: the problem wasn't loss. It was records. I overheard someone say, "This looks internal." That word hit harder than theft. Because internal means limited suspects. It means access logs, shift schedules, patterns. It means people like me. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to real fear, not abstract, not theoretical. Focused. Directed. And getting closer. The recount happened 2 days later. Not a full warehouse shutdown, but close enough. People were reassigned, sections blocked off, everything scanned again like we were resetting reality. I was part of the team doing it. That was the strangest part, standing there, scanning items I knew were missing, on paper. Every beat felt loaded. Every confirmed entry felt like I was both fixing and exposing my own mess at the same time. At first, things didn't line up, just like I'd designed. But the more thorough the process became, the more the illusions started to crack. Items I had misplaced digitally were being physically accounted for. Which meant one thing: the problem wasn't loss. It was records. I overheard someone say, "This looks internal." That word hit harder than theft. Because internal means limited suspects. It means access logs, shift schedules, patterns. It means people like me. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to real fear, not abstract, not theoretical. Focused. Directed. And getting closer. After the recount, everything changed, subtly, but enough that you could feel it in the air. The easy routine was gone. In its place was this quiet vigilance. Managers lingered longer on the floor. Logs were checked twice. Conversations had an edge to them now. And then came the part one hadn't planned for, individual reviews. Nothing dramatic, just quick one-on-one check-ins. Walk me through your process. Anything unusual you noticed? Harmless questions on the surface, but they weren't really about information. They were about watching how you answered. When it was my turn, I kept everything simple. Honest even, just not the whole truth. I described normal procedures, mentioned the confusion, pointed out how easy it would be for small logging errors to snowball. Which was ironic, considering I was the one who made it happen. The manager nodded, took notes, didn't push too hard. But I noticed something else. They weren't just listening. They were comparing. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about fixing the system anymore. It was about finding a person. After those check-ins, I changed how I moved through the place. Nothing obvious, just small adjustments. Fewer volunteered opinions, less eagerness to help, more time sticking to my own tasks. I figured the safest place to be now was somewhere in the middle, not too involved, not too detached. But it's hard to dial yourself back after you've been leaning in. A couple of coworkers even joked about it. "You've gone quiet, man." I laughed it off, said I was just tired. Which wasn't a lie, exactly. I wasn't sleeping much. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed logs, timestamps, tiny decisions I'd made like they were clues in a case I couldn't stop building. The worst part was the waiting. No accusations. No confrontation. Just this slow tightening. More reviews, more cross-checks, more emphasis on accountability. That word started showing up everywhere. And I kept thinking, if they know, why haven't they said anything? Turns out, not knowing is worse. Because your mind fills in the blanks with something far more precise, and far more terrifying, than reality. The closest I came to being exposed wasn't some dramatic reveal. It was a tiny inconsistency I didn't even remember creating. One of the managers called me over during a shift. Calm voice, neutral expression. He showed me a log entry, mine. A transfer between zones that didn't quite match the timing of another update. "Walk me through this," he said. I leaned in, pretending to study it like it was new to me. But inside, everything tightened. Because I couldn't immediately recall why I'd done that specific change. It was one move among dozens, and now it was standing alone under a microscope. So I did the only thing I could. I explained it as a delay. Said I must have scanned items earlier and logged them later. Mention how busy that shift was, how easy it is to miss time entries. All true. Just not this time. He didn't argue. Just nodded slowly. But he didn't look convinced either. And as I walked away, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't just maintaining a lie anymore. I was improvising one. After that conversation, everything felt closer to collapsing. Not because anything new happened, but because I could see how fragile the whole thing was. One forgotten detail, one log they decided to dig deeper into, and the pattern would start to form. I started running through exit scenarios in my head. What if they accused me? Deny everything? Blame the system? Admit to mistakes, but nothing intentional? None of it felt solid. And that's when it hit me, this whole plan depended on ambiguity. As long as things were unclear, I was safe. But the moment someone decided to make it clear, it would all point somewhere. Or worse, to someone. I noticed changes in how people interacted with each other too. Less trust. More second-guessing. Small tensions over simple tasks. My harmless disruption had started affecting real people. That part stuck with me more than the fear. Because I hadn't just manipulated data. I'd shifted the atmosphere. Made everyone a little more suspicious of each other. And I was right there, pretending I wasn't the reason why. In the end, There was no big reveal. No one pulled me into a room and laid out evidence. No accusations, no dramatic ending. Instead, the investigation just slowed down. After weeks of checks, recounts, and quiet scrutiny, management reached a conclusion. System inconsistencies. That was the phrase they used. A mix of delayed logging, human error, and process gaps. Procedures were updated, responsibilities reshuffled, and a new verification step was introduced. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it meant they never found me. I remember the exact moment it clicked, sitting in the break room, listening to two supervisors talk about the fix. One of them even said, "At least we know it wasn't theft." I almost laughed. Everything went back to normal after that. Or at least, it looked normal. The routines returned, the tension faded, people relaxed. But I didn't. Because I knew the truth wasn't that nothing had happened. It was that something had, and it got away with it. And that something was me. I didn't get caught. That's the simple version people usually expect at the end of a story like this. No punishment, no record, no dramatic fallout. But I wouldn't call it getting away with it either. Because even though I didn't take anything physical, I still walked away with something, and not in a good way. I took trust. I took that easy, unspoken assumption people had about each other just doing their jobs. I replaced it, even if only temporarily, with doubt. And once you see how easy it is to do that, it sticks with you. For a while, I told myself it proved something. That systems are fragile, that people don't look closely enough, that control is an illusion. All the usual rationalizations. But the truth is simpler and less flattering. I did it because I could. If you're reading this and thinking about testing some harmless loophole, don't. Not because you'll definitely get caught, but because you might not. And living with that is its own kind of consequence.